The year I turned 66 was marked by an event that felt utterly surreal. I won the lottery. $20 million. The timing was uncanny, almost poetic, as my birthday was merely a week away. My mind immediately raced ahead, picturing the joy I would bring to my children, Logan and Luna, when they gathered to celebrate. I had meticulously planned the grand reveal. After the substantial cut taken by taxes, I estimated the remaining sum would be just over $10 million. My intention was crystal clear. I would allocate $3 million for my own comfortable retirement. The rest, a little over $7 million, would be divided equally between my son and daughter. I envisioned using a portion of their share to purchase each of them a luxurious house, a substantial, beautiful home befitting their adult lives. In addition to the property, I intended to present each of them with a crisp check for $1 million a cushion to perhaps pay off debts, invest, or simply enjoy. It was a future built on sudden, unexpected fortune, but one I was eager to share, to use as a means to ease their burdens and provide them with security. The day of my 66th birthday finally dawned bright with anticipation. I had spent hours preparing their favorite dishes, filling the dining table with a feast of culinary delights. I sat there bathed in the soft glow of the evening light, the aroma of carefully cooked food filling the air, waiting. 10 o'clock came and went. The silence in the house grew heavy, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock. Neither Logan nor Luna had arrived. A knot of worry tightened in my chest. I called them first one, then the other, multiple times. No answer. The unease deepened, chilling me despite the warmth of the house. Earlier that afternoon, around 3 or 4, Luna had called. Her voice apologetic and rushed, explained she was held up with work and might be late. Shortly after, Logan texted citing an issue with a project he was managing that would cause a delay for him as well. At the time, I hadn't given it much thought. Work often demanded long hours. I'd simply told them to prioritize their jobs, assuming they would join me when they could. But now it was well past 10. 30 minutes ago, I had sent a message in our family WhatsApp group, a simple query, asking when they expected to arrive. The double check marks showing the message delivered remained stubbornly gray, unmarked as read. A profound sadness settled over me. With a heavy sigh, I pushed back my chair, the scraping sound loud in the stillness, and moved towards the living room couch. On the coffee table, 2 real estate contracts lay neatly arranged alongside 2 checks each for $1 million. These were the tangible symbols of the life-changing surprise I had waited all day to give, a surprise they hadn't shown up to receive. It felt like a cruel twist of fate. Just weeks before, some of my yoga friends had been swept up in lottery fever, playfully urging me to try my luck. Skeptical, but willing to indulge a bit of harmless fun, I had bought a ticket, never for a moment believing I would actually win. When I saw the winning numbers printed on my ticket, I was utterly stunned, a shock so profound it left me sleepless for the entire night. I hadn't breathed a word to anyone. There's an old saying, wealth shouldn't be flaunted, and I believed in keeping such a monumental change private, at least initially. I had chosen to take the lump sum payout fully aware it meant forfeiting a significant portion. 40% disappeared into taxes. But even after that hefty deduction, I was still left with over $10 million, a sum far beyond anything I had ever imagined possessing. My plan, as it formed in the quiet, stunned hours after my win, was clear and generous. Set aside $3 million for my retirement, a comfortable cushion for my remaining years, and distribute the remaining $7 million plus equally between Luna and Logan. Somewhere between the whirlwind of planning and the long, empty hours of waiting exhaustion finally claimed me. I drifted off to sleep on the couch, the untouched contracts and checks silent witnesses to my disappointed birthday. I wasn't sure how long I had been asleep when the sudden ring of my phone jolted me awake. It was Luna. I fumbled for the device answering before I was fully coherent. Before I could even utter a greeting, her voice quick and laced with a forced apology spilled through the receiver. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Work was absolutely insane today, just impossible to break away. It's way too late now to come all the way over, so I'll just head straight back to my apartment. You really should get to bed early." Her words were clipped, leaving no room for conversation or inquiry. She ended the call abruptly, leaving me staring at the dark screen. The time read 11:47 p.m. Luna's workplace was quite a distance from my home. I had worried about her long commute, especially after her internship ended and she secured a full-time position. To ease her daily burden and ensure her safety, I had taken the initiative to rent her a comfortable apartment, much closer to her office. I stared at the phone, the implications of her hurried call sinking in. Another 10 minutes crawled by. Still nothing from Logan. He too must be caught up in his work issues. I reasoned, though a part of me found it hard to believe they were both so delayed. With a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire day's disappointment, I stretched my aching back and slowly rose from the couch. Methodically, almost automatically, I began the task of putting away the uneaten birthday feast. Each carefully prepared dish was wrapped in plastic wrap, a sad protective covering, before being placed gently in the refrigerator. The real estate contracts and the million-dollar check symbols of a generous future that had evaporated before it could even begin were tucked away in the bottom drawer of my bedside table, out of sight, out of mind for now. By the time everything was neatly stored and I was ready for bed, the clock on my nightstand read nearly 1:00 a.m. Just like that, the birthday I had anticipated with such hopeful excitement, the day that was meant to be a celebration of life, family, and an incredible stroke of luck, was over. The next morning, Saturday, I woke to the same deafening silence from my phone. No missed calls, no birthday messages, nothing from either Luna or Logan. A small persistent hope lingered, so I sent a message in our family group chat. "It's Saturday. Come home for dinner. I have a surprise for you." The message was delivered, but as the hours passed, it remained unanswered. After a solitary breakfast, I decided to clear my head with a walk. Stepping outside, I immediately ran into my neighbor Mary, who was out strolling with her dog, a fluffy terrier that always seemed to be in a cheerful mood. Mary smiled warmly. "Good morning, Isabel. You're usually up with the birds. What kept you so long today?" I managed an awkward, strained smile, in return too mortified to confess I had stayed up late, waiting in vain for my children to remember my birthday. Mary chuckled, misinterpreting my reticence. "Let me guess you spent the whole of yesterday slaving away in the kitchen and just wore yourself out." When I didn't offer a verbal response, she continued, her tone kind, but laced with a hint of gentle frustration. "I told you ages ago, Isabel, for special occasions like birthdays, just book a nice dinner at a hotel or a good restaurant. It's so much less stress, less hassle. But no, you always insist that Logan likes spicy food, Luna prefers sweet and sour, and you have to cater to your granddaughter's need for a healthy kids' meal. Do you honestly think a decent restaurant can't accommodate that? Honestly, you go through all this trouble, all this effort just for them." Her words, simple and direct, struck me with the force of a revelation. For the first time, perhaps truly the first time in decades, I paused to consider the trajectory of my life. Hadn't it in fact always revolved around my children? Before my divorce from Jeff in the tumultuous years after, and through all the quiet years since, had I ever not once truly put myself and my own needs first? The thought was unsettling, a cold, uncomfortable truth I hadn't dared to acknowledge. Before I could fully delve into that newfound awareness, a sharp, distinctly unpleasant voice sliced through the peaceful morning air. "Oh, Mary, don't fall for her act. Don't pretend she's some poor, put-upon, self-sacrificing mother. She just loves to show off, always bragging about how devoted her precious Logan and Luna are. What a pathetic joke." I turned my gaze, landing on Sammy, an old neighbor I had never gotten along with. Our paths had crossed professionally years ago. We had worked at the same fashion export company before I took early retirement. There had even been a competitive edge to our relationship. We had both vied for the lucrative position of European market manager. I got the promotion. My French was more fluent, yes, but my overall skills, my understanding of international trade, my ability to negotiate, they simply outmatched hers. Sammy never accepted that reality. She convinced herself, and probably told anyone who would listen, that I had only won because of my language skills, not my actual business acumen. Since then, the air between us had always been thick with unspoken animosity. Now she looked me up and down, her lips curling into a sneer of pure disdain. "Look at you. Not even a single piece of decent jewelry on. I wonder how you've been treating yourself all these years, after all that supposed sacrifice." I had zero interest in engaging with her in falling into her trap of petty arguments. I turned back to Mary, offering a polite excuse. "I'm actually heading outside the neighborhood for a bit, Mary. You two catch up?" I began to walk away, but Sammy, clearly not finished, stepped directly into my path, blocking my exit. "Hold on right there. I waited here all morning, specifically to do you a favor. Don't be ungrateful." She crossed her arms over her chest, her smirk widening, a cruel gleam in her eyes. "Last night was my grandson's birthday. We had dinner at a lovely restaurant, and guess what? I saw the most absolutely ridiculous show unfold." I let out a sharp, exasperated exhale, my patience wearing thin. "Sammy, thank you for your concern, but I'm really not interested. Can I please leave now?" Sammy's face darkened with irritation, a small, disgruntled huff escaping her lips. Undeterred, she pulled out her phone, scrolled through her photo album with deliberate slowness, and then thrust the screen into my hand. "I don't need to explain anything," she said flatly. "Just watch." Reflexively, I tried to push the phone back to refuse the intrusion, but the moment my eyes registered the image on the screen, I froze. It was a video, shaky at first, then steadying. The camera focused on a woman in a vibrant red dress, her hair elegantly pinned up, radiating warmth and charm as she greeted guests. My breath hitched. I recognized her instantly. Chloe, my ex-husband, Jeff Smith's longtime mistress, the woman who had been a ghost in my marriage for years. Standing beside her, her arm linked affectionately through his, they were laughing together, talking animatedly, a picture of joyful intimacy. The camera panned slightly, settling on two men standing near a small stage. Logan, my son, and his biological father, Jeff. Behind them, two large banners screamed their messages in bold, celebratory lettering. "Happy 25th wedding anniversary, Jeff and Chloe." And beneath it, "Happy birthday, Chloe." My granddaughter Vivian then appeared on screen, her tiny hands clutching Chloe's, her voice bright and clear as she chirped sweetly, "Grandma Chloe, you're so pretty, way prettier and nicer than my other grandma." She tilted her head back, her eyes wide with innocent adoration. "I want you to be my real grandma. Next week is our preschool sports day. Can you and Grandpa come watch me?" The world tilted on its axis. A deafening silence roared in my ears, drowning out the sounds of the street. The video clip ended, but Sammy's commentary had just begun. You should have seen Logan." She sneered, her voice dripping with malicious gossip. "He bought that old witch a solid gold bracelet. Must have cost him close to 10 grand. I overheard his wife, Michelle isn't it, bragging about it on the phone in the restroom." She scoffed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Oh, and he got Jeff a whole crate of Hennessy brandy. The expensive stuff. Not cheap at all." Sammy clicked her tongue and shook her head in feigned sympathy. "Funny, isn't it? Every time he bothers to visit you, his own mother, he can't even be bothered to bring a 6-pack of beer." Her gaze sharpened, fixing on me. "And your precious Luna, don't even get me started on her. She got Chloe an entire gold jewelry set. Necklace, earrings, rings, the whole deal. And she kept calling her Mom, just like it was the most natural thing in the world." Sammy turned to me, her smile sickly sweet and utterly insincere. "Didn't you always brag about how devoted they were to you? How much they loved you? Strange, I don't see you getting even a crumb, do I?" Mary, bless her kind heart, reached out and grabbed Sammy's arm, attempting to put an end to the cruel onslaught. But Sammy yanked her arm away with surprising force. "No!" She snapped, her eyes blazing with venom. "She needs to hear this. She needs to see, really see, the kind of ungrateful, backstabbing wolves she raised. Always scrimping and saving for them, even sold her big house just to help them out. Huh, what a complete joke. She did all that self-sacrifice, just to fool herself into thinking they actually cared." Sammy's final words landed like a physical blow, a sledgehammer, to my already fractured spirit. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating, under the weight of her cruel accuracy and the horrific truth she had just unveiled. I returned the phone to her without a word, my fingers numb. My legs felt unsteady beneath me as I turned towards home, staggering forward in a daze, the familiar street, blurring through a sudden film of tears. A bitter metallic taste flooded my mouth. I realized I had bitten my lips so hard they had started to bleed. The moment I stepped through my front door, I collapsed onto the living room couch, the carefully composed facade crumbling entirely. Tears held back for so long finally broke free, a torrent of anguish I couldn't control. I covered my face with my hands as if that fragile barrier could somehow contain the flood of pain threatening to drown me. But no matter how tightly I pressed my palms against my eyes, the past, relentless and cruel, clawed its way to the surface. Memories, sharp and vivid, surged forward like a runaway carousel, peeling back old wounds I had spent years meticulously pretending didn't exist. My marriage to Jeff Smith had been a disaster, a slow-motion train wreck that had left me so disillusioned that by the time I reached 40, I had completely given up on the very idea of love, of romantic partnership. I divorced him and never considered remarrying. Jeff was 6 years my senior. We had met through a mutual friend, a connection that seemed promising at the time. Back then, he cut an impressive figure, tall, clean-cut, with an aura of stability and quiet ambition. He worked as an analyst in the city government's research office, a position with a seemingly bright future. At 24, I was merely a proofreader at a publishing house and not even a full-time employee at that. My parents, ever practical and focused on perceived security, saw him as an ideal match. He was respectable, well-employed, someone they believed could even lend a helping hand to my older brother's budding career. They told me repeatedly how incredibly lucky I was to marry him. So blinded by societal expectations and my parents' approval, and without truly understanding the depths of his past, I agreed to the marriage. I only learned the truth later, much, much too late, to undo the commitment I had made. The stark reality was that Jeff had never married before me, because he had once been deeply, irrevocably in love with someone else. A love so profound, so all-consuming, that it had left him emotionally stunted, unable to fully invest his heart in any relationship that followed. Marrying me had simply been convenient, a societal checkbox, a practical arrangement. By the time this devastating truth became apparent to me, a year after we had met and already bound by marriage vows, there was no easy way out. We weren't a couple filled with grand romantic gestures or overflowing affection, but we coexisted peacefully enough. There was a baseline of respect, even if passion was conspicuously absent. I desperately tried to convince myself it was enough. Not every marriage needed to be a whirlwind romance, I rationalized. Stability was good predictability meant safety and security. In the third spring of our marriage, a seismic shift occurred. I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Plunged headfirst into the chaotic, demanding world of motherhood, I was utterly overwhelmed. Two constantly crying infants, sleepless nights that blurred into exhausted days, a body still recovering from the rigors of childbirth. I felt like I was drowning desperately, needing a lifeline. I longed to return to work, to reclaim a part of my identity, outside of being solely a mother. I asked Jeff if his mother Laura could come and stay with us for a while to help with the immense task of caring for the babies. But every time I brought it up, he conjured a new excuse. His father was sick. His mother was too busy. She simply couldn't spare the time. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. A year passed and Laura still hadn't visited, still hadn't offered any assistance. My publishing house understandably couldn't wait indefinitely for my return. When I failed to come back, they filled my position with someone else. I was heartbroken, feeling utterly helpless and trapped. Then came the twins' first birthday party. We celebrated at home, a small gathering. Laura didn't show up. That was the first time resentment, cold and sharp, began to take root in my heart. She was their grandmother yet. In an entire year, she had barely seen them, let alone offered any help. Jeff must have sensed my mood, the quiet hurt simmering beneath the surface. Because that night, he finally offered an explanation, a seemingly plausible reason for his mother's absence and lack of involvement. His mother, he explained, had suffered a bad fall while cleaning her house some time ago. She had injured her lower back quite severely and had been confined to bed, slowly recovering all this time. She hadn't told us, he claimed, because she didn't want to worry us. Guilt, sharp and sudden, washed over me. I had been harboring resentment, suspecting her of indifference or lack of care, while all along she had been injured and suffering in silence. After the party, Jeff's aunt came over to see the children. Seeing her, I seized the opportunity, pulling her aside, concern tightening my chest. "Aunt?" I began, my voice low and worried. "How bad is Laura's injury? Does she need better medical care?" Maybe she should come to a hospital here in San Francisco, where she could get proper treatment. As I spoke, I reached into my purse, taking out $1,000, a significant sum for me at the time. "Can you please give this to her when you go back?" I pleaded, just in case she needs anything at all for her recovery. Jeff's aunt hesitated, a strange, unreadable expression flickering across her face, a complex mix of amusement and pity. For a long moment she said nothing, simply looking at me with those knowing eyes. Then finally she let out a small, mirthless chuckle. "Isabel," she said softly, shaking her head. "Laura doesn't have a back injury." I stared at her, utterly bewildered, the pieces not fitting together. She sighed, her gaze holding a depth of understanding I couldn't decipher. "I wasn't going to say anything," she murmured. "It's not my place, but every time I visit I see you struggling here, raising these two babies all by yourself, and it just doesn't sit right with me." She glanced around, lowering her voice further, then leaned in close. "The truth is, Jeff arranged for his mother to be a full-time nanny for someone else." I blinked, trying to process her words. "What?" I whispered, my stomach clenching. "She's been working as a free babysitter." Jeff's aunt nodded slowly, confirming the unbelievable. "For who?" My stomach twisted violently, a cold dread settling in. "Maybe Jeff's boss," she said flatly, her tone devoid of emotion. "The man travels a lot and his wife needed help with their kids. Jeff sent his mother to take care of them." Something sharp and cold lodged itself in my throat, making it difficult to swallow. I barely managed to whisper the words, heavy with shock and disbelief. So she could take care of his boss's children, but not her own grandchildren. The aunt nodded again, confirming the crushing truth. A suffocating weight settled on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. She sighed again, a sound of weary resignation, then murmured, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but keep a very close eye on Jeff, Isabel. Make sure no one steals him away from you." Her words, meant as a warning, sent a shiver of pure dread down my spine. Then she patted my arm gently, turned and walked away, leaving me standing there frozen, watching her retreating figure, unable to move, unable to breathe, the world spinning around me. The words from Jeff's aunt felt like a sharp thorn lodged deep in my skin, festering and painful. That night I tossed and turned in bed sleep, an impossible luxury. The next morning, as soon as Jeff left for work, I found myself drawn, almost compelled to his study. I rarely entered this room, only during cleaning, and even then I scrupulously avoided touching his personal belongings. I had always believed that even within the confines of marriage, individuals deserved their own private space, their own boundaries. The study was sparsely furnished, 2 walls lined with bookshelves, a simple desk and a chair. I sat down at the desk, my hands trembling slightly, and pulled open the top drawer. Inside I found a few letters, his office's metal badge, a small address book, and some seemingly unimportant documents. But buried at the very bottom of the drawer, tucked away as if hidden, I found a black and white photograph. With careful fingers, I lifted it out. The photo showed 5 people. Jeff stood next to a young woman wearing a white floral blouse with ruffled sleeves, her long hair neatly braided into 2 plaits. I didn't need anyone to tell me who she was. The unspoken connection between them, the palpable intimacy captured in the image, was unmistakable. It was a woman's intuition, sharp and undeniable. I flipped the photo over. In the bottom right corner, delicate, elegant handwriting graced the back. It read, "Bound by heart love, buried deep, April 19th, 1969. The writing was soft and graceful, almost certainly hers. 1969. That was Jeff's final year of college. My gaze swept across the study, searching, finally landing on a locked cabinet, tucked away at the bottom of one of the bookshelves. Minutes later, driven by a desperate need for answers, I found the key cleverly hidden within the spine of a copy of How the Steel Was Tempered. That night, after putting the twins to bed, their small bodies finally quiet in sleep, I forced myself to sit down at the desk. I unlocked the cabinet and began to read. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of letters spilled out. I read through them page after agonizing page, barely managing to get through a third of the collection that night. The woman who had written to Jeff was named Chloe. Through her words, I pieced together a love story, a clandestine narrative that had spanned over a decade. They hailed from the same small town, leaving home for the same university, in a distant city. In that unfamiliar environment, far from family and childhood friends, they had leaned on each other, encouraged each other, and eventually, inevitably, fallen deeply in love. Their relationship had grown flourishing in quiet, stolen moments, in unspoken understanding until they were seemingly inseparable. But before Chloe had left for college, her family had already arranged a fiancé for her, a man from a respectable family. Bound by tradition and obligation, she had agreed to the engagement. Every month, letters arrived from her betrothed. Sometimes he even sent her money to help with her studies and expenses. So their love, deep and true as it seemed, had to remain hidden, a secret whispered in letters. By the time they graduated, most students returned to their hometowns to find work. Chloe's fiancé's family possessed wealth and connections, securing her a coveted job teaching French at a prestigious private school. Meanwhile, Jeff, after 2 years of persistent applications, had finally been admitted to a prestigious university up north for graduate school. One married, the other left their paths diverging, but the letters, the emotional lifeline that connected them, never stopped. It was while I was newly pregnant with the twins, navigating the exhaustion and nausea of early pregnancy, that Chloe had written to Jeff complaining about the overwhelming burden of balancing her work and childcare responsibilities. Her husband, perpetually away on business trips, barely acknowledged their existence, she wrote. She was overworked, overwhelmed, constantly sore from carrying the burden of single parenthood alone. Jeff, his heart aching for the woman he truly loved, took action. He sent his mother Laura, the woman who was supposedly bedridden, with a back injury to help Chloe raise Chloe's daughter. That revelation alone, delivered in Chloe's casual script, was enough to shatter the carefully constructed facade of my reality. But the subsequent letters, those were the ones that truly gutted me, leaving me feeling hollowed out and broken. Every time Laura takes care of me, I feel both guilty and happy. Chloe wrote to Jeff, "I want to call her Mom, but I don't know in what capacity. I feel terrible for your wife. You barely make $1,500 a month yet. You still manage to send me $500 in secret. If she ever found out, she'd throw a fit. You said your wife had twins. Well, the only thing I've ever seen give birth to 2 at once is my dog. I can't even imagine how big she must have been. Just the thought is horrifying." Her words, dismissive and cruel, twisted the knife deeper. "My co-workers joke about how I always get so many letters," she continued. "I tell them they're from my husband, my love. They think I'm talking about Bruce, the man I married." The inked words on the page reeked of forbidden intimacy, a humid, suffocating closeness that made me feel physically ill. Their secret world built on lies, and my pain was laid bare before me. That evening when Jeff returned home, I didn't greet him. I didn't speak. I simply walked up to him, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and heartbreak, and threw the dozens of letters in his face. The carefully constructed peace of our home exploded into a war zone of shouting accusations and raw, unleashed pain. I had just given birth. I was physically and emotionally exhausted, teetering on the edge of complete unraveling. And him. He just stood there, his face utterly impassive, watching my breakdown with a chilling detachment, as if I were a stranger throwing a tantrum. Only when my voice was hoarse from screaming, when my body trembled uncontrollably from the force of my rage, did he finally let out a sigh, heavy with nothing but irritation. "Are you done?" he asked, his tone bored, dismissive. "There's nothing between us, Isabel. Just letters. If it bothers you so much, I'll stop writing them." His words, so cold, so minimizing, made my fingers go numb, made my legs weak and shaky. But I didn't even have the luxury of collapsing, of breaking down completely. The twins, disturbed by the shouting, had woken up and were now wailing from their room, their cries sharp and desperate. Jeff, seemingly unaffected by the chaos, simply locked himself in his study, retreating into his private world, ignoring everything. I wiped my swollen, tear-filled eyes with the back of my hand and forced myself to my feet. The babies were hungry. They needed their nighttime bottle, or they wouldn't stop crying. But when I stumbled into the kitchen, the formula can on the counter was empty. A crushing wave of despair crashed over me, threatening to pull me under. I had reminded Jeff for days, that we were running low on formula. I had asked him, begged him to pick some up on his way home from work. Even that very morning before he left, I had reminded him again, stressing the urgency. But he had forgotten. And now, in the middle of the night, with 2 hungry, screaming infants, it was too late. Something inside me, something that had been stretched thin and pulled taut for years, finally snapped. Fueled by a white-hot surge of fury and desperation, I stormed to his study door. It was locked, a symbol of his emotional unavailability and his retreat from our shared life. With all the strength I could muster, a primal scream trapped in my throat, I kicked the door open. The sight that greeted me made my vision blur with uncontrollable rage. Jeff was sitting at his desk, a photograph in his hands, gently tracing his fingers over Chloe's face. His eyes fixed on her image were filled with an undeniable depth of affection and longing, the same affection I had so desperately craved for years. He froze when he saw me standing there silhouetted against the hall light. I strode over to him. My steps unsteady but determined, snatched the photograph from his hands and ripped it into a dozen pieces, scattering the scraps at his feet like discarded refuse. "Jeff Smith!" I screamed, my voice raw with pain and fury. "You are a lying, heartless bastard. I want a divorce." For the first time, his detached composure cracked. He froze stunned into silence. When he finally snapped out of his shock, a flicker of panic crossed his face. He scrambled on the floor desperately, trying to gather the torn pieces of Chloe's face, carefully tucking them into his pocket, as if they were the most precious thing in the world. Then he turned on me, his face contorted with a sudden terrifying fury. "You insane, hysterical, irrational shrew," he bellowed, his voice venomous. He tried to storm past me to escape the confrontation. I grabbed his sleeve, refusing to let him go, to let him retreat again. His eyes burned red with rage. With both hands, he shoved me hard. I wasn't prepared for the force of his push. I went flying backward, my lower back slamming violently against the sharp corner of the desk I had just kicked open. A searing, agonizing pain shot through me, stealing my breath. For a moment, my vision went completely white, the world dissolving into a haze of pain. Through the blinding agony, I saw Jeff hesitate, just for a second. Then, his face hardening, he turned and walked out the door, slamming it shut behind him, leaving me alone in the ruined study, clutching my aching back. The house fell into a terrible silence, broken only by the heartbreaking cries of my children, echoing from their room, their tiny voices, a mournful soundtrack to the night's devastation. I don't remember precisely how I made it through that night, only the chaos, the physical agony in my back, and the relentless cries of my children, their tiny voices piercing my eardrums like needles, a constant reminder of the life I was desperately trying to hold together. The next day, driven by a desperate need for justice, or perhaps just revenge, I wrote a detailed letter to Jeff's workplace, the city hall, reporting his inappropriate relationships and his neglect of his family. But it was as if I had tossed a pebble into the ocean. The letter disappeared without a ripple, eliciting no response. When I happened to run into Jeff's supervisor shortly after, the man had the astonishing audacity to chastise me, instead implying that I was being unreasonable, that I was causing trouble, and embarrassing my husband by airing our private matters in public. "Whatever disagreements you and your husband have," he told me, his voice dripping with condescension and patriarchal disapproval, "you should handle them at home. Don't drag your personal life and your husband's workplace into it." I sought help from the local women's support group, hoping for guidance, for validation. But back then, society was different. People were far less willing to intervene in a marriage unless there was undeniable immediate physical danger. Jeff's affair, they told me, was just letters, not real cheating. My children were still so young, their lives potentially disrupted by a divorce. Their collective advice was dishearteningly consistent. Be patient, endure. Look at the bigger picture. Think of the children. I felt like a caged animal, desperately searching for an escape. But every door I tried was locked, every avenue of support closed off. My parents and my older brother were adamantly against me getting a divorce. Every woman goes through this, they insisted, dismissing my pain. Just endure it, Isabel. It will pass. Once the kids are older, your life will be easier. Jeff works hard enough as it is. You don't even have a job anymore, so stop making trouble for him. He didn't even bring that woman home, so what exactly are you complaining about? Their lack of empathy was stunning, their focus solely on maintaining the appearance of a respectable family. Jeff, for his part, simply ignored me every time I mentioned divorce, as if the word itself was offensive. Eventually, he stopped coming home altogether, simply moving into a dorm near City Hall, returning only once every 10 days or so for a brief detached visit. The children were too young to understand the chasm that had opened between their parents. They sucked on their tiny fingers, babbling their first words, oblivious to the growing rift that was tearing our family apart. For their sake, for the illusion of stability, I swallowed my pride again and again. Like so many women trapped in broken, unhappy marriages, I had become weak, my resolve eroded the moment I became a mother. And I had not one but two weaknesses, two small lives entirely dependent on me. 7 long, agonizing years passed. 7 years of degradation, of physical and emotional exhaustion, of slow, quiet suffering. Each day was a battle against the quiet despair that threatened to consume me. Then came the final straw, the seemingly small act that broke the camel's back. Jeff had secretly sent Chloe another $1,000 this time so she could buy herself the latest, fully automated washing machine. But the letter addressed to her old school had been returned to sender. Chloe had transferred to a new school, and the post office sent it back to Jeff's address. I found it among his mail. I read his words detailing the gift, the generosity towards the woman he loved. And for the first time in years, something inside me didn't just crack. It shattered completely. We didn't even own a semi-automatic washing machine. In the dead of winter, with my hands raw and cracked from the cold, I was still scrubbing my children's dirty clothes, by hand kneeling by the sink, the ice-cold water biting at my skin. That night I confronted him, the years of suppressed rage finally boiling over. We fought a bitter, brutal fight, unlike any before. For the first time, he completely lost control. Furniture was overturned, a vase hurled across the room, shattering just inches behind my head. I didn't hesitate this time. I called the police. Then, fueled by a desperate need to protect myself and expose his cruelty, I called a local news station, asking them to report on how I had been attacked, how my violent husband had nearly disfigured me. The scandal erupted like a wildfire, spreading rapidly. It reached not just City Hall where Jeff worked, but even the state government. His upcoming promotion, a highly anticipated transfer to a higher state-level position, was immediately revoked. And as younger, more educated, and less scandal-ridden officials entered City Hall, Jeff's career stagnated completely. He was demoted, his aspirations crushed. He spent years stuck as a low-level administrative assistant, filing dusty paperwork in the archives, his once promising future reduced to bureaucratic monotony. Only then, when he had truly lost everything that mattered to him, professionally, did he finally sit down and agree to a divorce. It took 2 months of relentless, emotionally draining fighting to finalize the terms. Jeff, despite his previous neglect, refused to let go of Logan. "If you want a divorce," he stated coldly, "I keep our son." I agreed, though the decision tore me apart. When it came to the financial settlement, I was ruthless, driven by years of resentment and the need to provide for myself and Luna. I threatened to expose his long-standing affair with Chloe to ruin her reputation entirely. In the end, I forced him to return every cent he had demonstrably spent on her over the years. I had no way of knowing the full amount the secret transfers, but I threw out a number, a figure large enough to sting $50,000. By then, his salary had risen to just over $2,000 a month. $50,000 wasn't an impossible sum, but it certainly wasn't pocket change either. Jeff, of course, didn't want Chloe to suffer, didn't want to admit to her that he couldn't cover the cost himself. But he also couldn't stomach the humiliation of borrowing money from friends or colleagues. After the public scandal, so trapped, he mortgaged his parents' house and took out a loan for the $50,000. I'll never forget the expression on his face when he handed me that check. A mixture of fury, defeat, and pure hatred. If looks could kill, I would have died 1,000 times over in that moment. The house we had lived in belonged to Jeff before our marriage. It was his separate property. I left it behind without a second glance, but I took everything inside. Every stick of furniture, every appliance, even the old stew pot that had been patched up twice. I cleared the house out. I hauled it all to the nearest flea market and sold every last item, turning the remnants of our life together into tangible cash. Then, with Luna in my arms, a small bewildered child clutching me tightly, I walked away from that house, from that marriage, and from Jeff Smith forever. Logan, as agreed, was taken in by Jeff's parents. From that day forward, the only connection Jeff and I shared was the occasional strained exchange of our children, handing them off like packages during visitations. When my father discovered that I had actually gone through with the divorce, that I had defied his explicit instructions to endure, he was absolutely furious. I had rebelled against his authority, against the societal norms he clung to, and as a consequence, he never came to see me again. My mother, bound by loyalty and perhaps fear of my father, would sneak visits behind his back, but she never offered any real support, any practical help. Her visits were filled with endless sighs, tearful laments about how difficult everything was, and veiled criticisms disguised as concern. She never once asked me what I planned to do next, how I would survive, how I would provide for myself and Luna. I was deeply disappointed by their reaction, by their lack of support in my moment of greatest need, but I no longer begged for a love or acceptance that was clearly never going to come. The road ahead was uncertain, undoubtedly difficult, and unforgiving, but at least finally, I had cut myself free from that disgusting, rotting marriage. At least I was no longer the discarded wife, a pathetic footnote in someone else's grand love story, desperately struggling to hold on to a husband who didn't want me. I was free, if only to face the daunting challenges ahead on my own terms. After the divorce was finalized, I used the money I had secured from Jeff, the $50,000 plus the proceeds from selling the household items, to buy a modest 650-square-foot apartment. It wasn't much a small space in an older building, but it was mine, a safe haven purchased with my own hard-won funds. I bought a few essential pieces of furniture, transferred Luna to a new school, closer to our apartment, and once everything was settled, once we had a roof over our heads and a semblance of stability, I turned my attention to something I had been quietly anticipating payback. Chloe. The woman who had been the catalyst for so much of my pain had also built her life on a foundation of deceit. It was time to expose that foundation. I penned a carefully worded commendation letter addressed to Bruce Chloe's husband, The man she had consistently referred to as merely her husband in her letters to Jeff, all while secretly calling Jeff her love. Tied in the letter, I praised Chloe's unwavering kindness, her years of tender care and devotion, specifically highlighting the period when Jeff had sent his mother Laura to help her raise her daughter. I subtly framed it as a testament to Chloe's compassionate nature, a gesture of friendship between two families that had grown into something deeper over time, implying a closeness that went beyond mere acquaintance, linking her directly back to Jeff. Bruce, upon receiving this seemingly innocent but subtly revealing letter, wasted no time. He filed for divorce, immediately standing before the judge in tears, declaring that his wife had been engaged in a long-term extramarital affair. Unlike my experience, no one told him to endure. No one dismissed it as just a few letters. Instead, society, the court, everyone condemned Chloe, calling her shameless, immoral, a disgrace. Their divorce was finalized in record time, a stark contrast to the 2 months of fighting it took me. Simultaneously, Chloe was fired from her teaching job, the scandal likely exacerbated by rumors circulating, perhaps accusations of accepting bribes from students' parents. Whether those specific accusations were true, or not only Bruce and perhaps Chloe herself would ever truly know. I didn't bother following their lives after that. My focus was entirely on building my own life, my own future for myself and Luna. I found a job as a merchandise coordinator at an apparel export company, starting at the bottom rung. It was demanding work. I had to learn French, not just conversational, but the nuances of business and trade. I had to master the complexities of international trade, navigating, logistics, regulations, and foreign markets. And all of this while juggling the immense responsibility of raising Luna alone, ensuring she was cared for, educated, and loved. There was no time for petty gossip about people I had long since left behind. 5 years later, through sheer hard work, determination, and mastering my craft, I was promoted, becoming the head of European sales operations, a position I had once competed for with Sammy. And Jeff, he never moved up. He remained stuck in the same stagnant, low-ranking position at City Hall, his career prospects dead. With no career reputation left to worry about, no future advancement to protect, he finally married Chloe. He even took out a loan to throw her a lavish wedding, a public display of commitment after decades of secrecy. But the person who suffered the most, the one whose life was undeniably negatively impacted by their union, was Logan. Anytime Logan and Chloe had a conflict, no matter how trivial, Jeff always sided with Chloe. I will never forget one particular night, Christmas Eve, many years ago. Logan arrived at my doorstep late, looking utterly distraught. His clothes were tattered, his backpack filthy, his little hands frozen blue from the cold. The moment he saw me, he threw himself into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mom, I never ever want to go back to that house again. I hate them. I hate them both." Through his gasping tears, I finally managed to piece together the story of what had happened. With Christmas fast approaching, Chloe had prepared a special dinner, including delicious roast beef ribs. Logan, unable to resist the enticing aroma, had snuck a small piece from the kitchen. Chloe caught him in the act, and in a fit of disproportionate anger, she slapped him hard across the face. When Jeff came home and learned what had transpired, he didn't reprimand Chloe at all, didn't question her harsh punishment. Instead, he scolded Logan, telling him it was wrong to steal food, even in his own home. Chloe, emboldened by Jeff's reaction, had smugly ordered Logan to stand outside in the freezing cold, to reflect on his behavior. It was bitterly cold that night. Humiliated, hurt, and furious, Logan had run to his room, grabbed his backpack and run straight to me, his mother. "Mom, can I stay with you? Can I never go back to Dad's house?" Looking at his pale face, his chapped lips, his tear-streaked cheeks, I pulled him into my arms and held him tight, his small body trembling. From that moment on, he refused to return to his father's house, refusing to live with Chloe. Chloe predictably was thrilled by this development. I don't know what she told Jeff, what manipulations she used, but the man who had once fought tooth and nail during our divorce to keep his son suddenly stopped resisting. Instead, he simply sent over all of Logan's belongings, packed into boxes, as if discarding an unwanted item. For the first 2 years after Logan came to live with me, Jeff still sent sporadic child support checks, though they were never consistent or enough to cover half of Logan's expenses. Then one day they simply stopped coming, and that was it. I raised both my children alone entirely on my own. I taught them right from wrong, instilled in them the values I believed in. I put them through school, sacrificing my own comfort and needs to ensure they had opportunities. I saved money penny by penny to buy them cars when they were old enough even to help them afford homes. I believed my sacrifices, my endless efforts, my unwavering love meant something. But now it seemed they had betrayed me, just as their father had years ago. It felt as though I had cried my last tear that night, the night I learned the truth about the anniversary party. Outside the window, the darkness slowly swallowed the final traces of daylight, mirroring the encroaching despair I felt inside. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaky beneath me, and made my way slowly to the bedroom. Lying in bed, I felt like a fish out of water, gasping for air, desperately searching for oxygen in a world that suddenly felt hostile and suffocating. Then the sound of keys turning in the front door lock echoed through the quiet house, jarring me from my pain. Luna's voice followed, bright and casual. "Mom, we're back." I didn't move. I didn't answer. Logan's confused voice came next, slightly muffled. "Mom's not home. Didn't she tell us to come for dinner this morning? Why hasn't she even started cooking?" Luna let out a weary sigh, her voice dripping with thinly veiled annoyance. "Who knows? Honestly, she's been getting more and more annoying these past 2 years. So sentimental all the time, so dramatic. Every time I'm around her, I feel completely suffocated. It's honestly so much easier being with Chloe." "Sheesh, Luna, keep your voice down." Logan hissed, obviously uncomfortable. "If Mom hears you, she'll be upset." "So what if she is—" Luna retorted, her voice rising slightly. "Are we really supposed to never see Dad again, just to make her happy? He's still our father." Their conversation continued in hushed, indignant tones. Then my bedroom door creaked open. A small, warm body barreled towards me, a bundle of innocent energy. "Vivian!" My granddaughter shrieked, her voice full of playful excitement. "Grandma, are you playing hide and seek with us? I found you." The voices in the living room fell into a sudden, startled silence. Seconds later, both Logan and Luna rushed into the bedroom, their expressions shifting from annoyance to concern. The light flicked on, bathing the room in sudden brightness. Logan froze just inside the doorway. He stood there, rooted to the floor, staring at me, his mother lying in bed, my face streaked with the undeniable evidence of dried tears. His lips parted, his voice barely above a whisper, a hesitant question hanging in the air. "Mom." Luna hesitated in the doorway for a moment longer, her expression unreadable, a mask of calculation settling over her features. The room was heavy with silence, the unspoken tension thick enough to cut with a knife. After a long, pregnant pause, she cautiously stepped forward, moving towards the bed. She reached out her hand, tentative, and touched mine. "Mom." She murmured, her voice soft, perhaps practiced. "I'm so sorry about yesterday. We were genuinely so busy with work, That's truly why we couldn't come. Are you mad at us?" I stared at her, unblinking, saying nothing, my gaze steady and unwavering. She shrank slightly under my silent scrutiny, her voice growing smaller, less certain. "Mom, I really had to work overtime. It wasn't like I had a choice. You know this is a really important time for my career. I have to prove myself." And Logan, ever the eager accomplice, chimed in quickly, his voice full of forced warmth and cheerfulness. "Yeah, Mom, she's right. We really did have to work. But look, we're here now, aren't we? We came to celebrate with you today. Come on, get up, let's have some cake." I looked at them, then truly looked at the adults my children had become. And all I could see was Jeff. The effortless way they lied, the smooth way they twisted their words, attempting to placate me, to manipulate the situation, just as he had once done. A devastating realization washed over me. Had I been fighting against something impossible all along? Had all my efforts, the love I had poured into them, the sacrifices I had made, the endless nights of working myself to the bone just to provide for them, had it all meant nothing against the undeniable weight of their bloodline, the influence of their father? "Grandma, I want cake." Vivian, oblivious to the charged atmosphere, tugged impatiently at my hand with her tiny fingers, her excitement for sugar nearly pulling me off the bed. Logan, seizing the opportunity to break the tension, quickly slipped my slippers onto the floor, next to the bed, and helped me sit up, his voice still laced with that forced artificial warmth. "Mom, Vivian's been so excited all day about celebrating your birthday. She kept saying how much she missed you. The moment her dance class ended, I brought her straight here." They half led, half dragged me to the dining table. On it sat a small 6-inch cartoon cake. The design was Elsa from Frozen Vivian's current obsession. I managed a small smile, not because I was happy, not because their arrival had erased the pain of the previous night, but because I suddenly saw, with devastating clarity, what a complete and utter fool I had been for over 30 years. A memory surfaced unbidden and sharp that night, so many years ago, after my violent fight with Jeff, the empty can of formula, sitting accusingly on the kitchen counter, the desperate, gasping cries of my twin infants echoing through the silent house. I had fought through the searing pain in my bruised back, somehow managing to cook oatmeal with one arm while rocking a crying baby with the other. One would finally drift off to sleep, only to be instantly woken up by the cries of the other. I had hated Jeff so intensely that night, a burning visceral hatred. I had wanted nothing more than to walk out, to leave everything behind and escape. But when I looked at my children, at their small, helpless faces, I couldn't. So I stayed. I stayed and I fought. I fought for them for years, against poverty, against loneliness, against the constant struggle to make ends meet. I worked endlessly, sacrificing my own needs and desires to provide for them, to give them a better life than I had had. I learned French, I mastered international trade. I climbed the corporate ladder driven by the relentless need to earn just an extra $1,000 a month to ensure their security. I had fought tooth and nail against Sammy, against everyone, for that manager promotion, for every inch of ground I gained. And now they had spent my birthday, the day meant to celebrate Mia, at that woman's anniversary party. Now they had gifted her expensive gold bracelets, crates of pricey liquor, an entire jewelry set, and me. At 66 years old, the only birthday cake I received was whatever my 5-year-old granddaughter happened to bring. Suppressing the raw anguish that was rising in my chest, threatening to choke me, I pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. Then, in a voice that surprised me with its calmness, its utter lack of emotion, I said, "Sit down, both of you. I have something I need to say." Logan and Luna exchanged a quick, uneasy glance before hesitantly sitting down across from me. Vivian, completely oblivious to the tension, thinking we were finally about to eat cake, stared at the Elsa figurine on top, her eyes bright with anticipation. I looked directly at my children, meeting their gazes head-on, and got straight to the point, cutting through the forced pleasantries. You didn't come yesterday because you were at their anniversary party, weren't you? Their faces instantly changed, the carefully constructed masks of innocent apology dissolving. Luna's brows furrowed, a defensive posture already forming. "Mom," she asked cautiously, her voice tight. "What exactly are you trying to say?" I kept my voice steady, unwavering. "If you wanted to attend their celebration," I continued, each word deliberate, "you could have just told me. There was no need to lie about working late, about project issues, and make me sit here waiting until midnight." Luna visibly stiffened, her complexion paling as the truth of her deception was laid bare. Logan lowered his head, his expression shifting to one of undeniable guilt. Minutes passed in heavy, suffocating silence, punctuated only by Vivian's soft humming as she admired the cake. Then Luna began to cry soft, theatrical sobs, at first quickly escalating. She moved from her seat across the table to sit beside me, gripping my hand tightly in hers, her fingers digging into my skin. "Mom," she pleaded through her tears, her voice choked. "Please just let the past go. You have to stop holding on to this resentment, this bitterness. Dad has connections, resources. He can help me and Logan professionally, financially. Why should we struggle when we could ask him for help? Mom." She continued, her tears falling onto my hand, burning my skin like fire. "We've had it hard too, you know. Can't you just try, just for a moment, to understand us?" She took a shaky breath. "I'm getting married next year," she revealed, rushing the words out as if this somehow justified her actions. "Lucifer and I are planning our future, and Dad..." She paused, her grip tightening. "Dad promised to pull some strings to get him a job at City Hall, a secure position." She looked at me then, and her next words, delivered with a chilling lack of self-awareness, pierced straight through me, twisting the knife. "If I can't rely on Dad," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "am I supposed to rely on you?" I stared at her, truly stared at the woman sitting beside me, holding my hand, and felt as if I were seeing her for the very first time in her life. Logan had settled down relatively young, marrying Michelle right after college. Luna, on the other hand, had pursued higher education, earning a graduate degree, then thrown herself into her work, always pushing herself harder and further, climbing the professional ladder with ruthless ambition. And the more educated she became, the more successful she was in the world's eyes, the colder she seemed to grow, the more she seemed to calculate every interaction, weighing pros and cons before making every choice. She shifted uncomfortably under my steady gaze, avoiding my eyes. Instead, she stared blankly at the Elsa cake on the table and murmured the words tumbling out now in a torrent of long-held resentment. "Mom, I've been holding this in for such a long time, but you need to hear it. If you hadn't caused that whole scene at City Hall, if you hadn't insisted on the divorce, Dad never would have left you. Logan and I wouldn't have had to struggle the way we did growing up between two houses, witnessing the tension. Dad wouldn't have ended up a low-ranking government worker until the day he retired, his career potential wasted. If you had just endured like everyone told you to, things would have been so different, for all of us so much easier." "Luna, stop it." Logan snapped, finally finding his voice visibly uncomfortable with the direction her honesty had taken. She flinched at his sharp tone, then let out a bitter, humorless chuckle. "Am I wrong, Logan?" she shot back, turning her frustration on him. If Mom hadn't insisted on leaving, Dad, Chloe, never would have had a chance to replace her, to become the central figure in his life. But Mom made her choice back then. She chose to leave, so why is she still holding on to this resentment, this bitterness after all these years? Her fists clenched on the table. Besides, she added, her voice rising in fervent, almost desperate defense, Chloe and Dad only truly got together, only married years after your divorce was finalized. She wasn't a homewrecker, Mom. She wasn't the reason Dad left you. Her face was flushed with emotion, her voice raw with her own perceived injustices. Then she turned back to me, her eyes pleading, demanding understanding. Mom, please just let it go. Stop drowning in your own bitterness. You can't pass this hatred, this decades-old pain, onto me and Logan. No matter what you say, no matter how angry you are, Dad is still our father. I stared at her, my mind reeling. This was not my daughter, not the child I had raised, not the girl I had sacrificed everything for. My fingers trembled as I slowly, deliberately pointed to the door. "Get out," I said, my voice quiet but firm, leaving no room for argument. "Both of you. I don't have children like you." A long, suffocating silence followed, thick with shock and the weight of my words. Then slowly, deliberately, Luna stood up. Her voice when she spoke was eerily calm, chillingly devoid of warmth. "Fine, Mom," she said, her eyes cold. "Maybe we should all take some time to cool off. I won't be coming back for a while." She reached across the table and grabbed the Elsa cake, her movements precise and unhurried. "Vivian." She called out to my granddaughter, her voice softening slightly. "Let's go have the cake at Auntie's place, shall we?" Vivian hesitated, glancing at me with wide, confused eyes before slowly sliding off her chair and reaching for Luna's outstretched hand. Hand in hand, mother and daughter walked towards the front door. Logan lingered for a moment, hovering uncertainly. Outside, Luna's impatient voice rang out sharp and clear. "Logan, hurry up! What are you waiting for?" He picked up his coat from the back of the chair and looked at me one last time, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. "Just calm down. I'll go talk to Luna." Then he too left, closing the door softly behind him. As the door began to click shut, I heard Vivian's small, innocent voice questioning the sudden departure. "Does Grandma not want us anymore?" Luna's reply was sharp, deliberate, undeniably cruel. "That's right, honey. You don't have a grandma anymore." Vivian's voice, instead of sounding sad, rose in a cheerful exclamation. "Yay. That means Chloe is my real grandma now. Tomorrow I'll ask Grandpa and Grandma Chloe to come to my school's sports day." The voices faded as the door clicked shut completely, sealing the silence. I stood there staring at the closed door for a long, long time, the quiet echoing in the empty house. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth again. No matter how hard I tried to push them away, to erase the words and the images from my mind, the pain in my chest was crushing a physical weight. But I would get used to it, I told myself. I had survived worse, hadn't I? Slowly leaning heavily on the table for support, I steadied myself, pushing off my knees to stand upright. I walked to the bedside drawer, pulled out the 2 real estate contracts I had prepared, with such hope and excitement just days before, and tore them into tiny, irreparable shreds. If they had their father now, if they had a new mother who was prettier, kinder, more loving, then I had no more reason to care, no more reason to sacrifice. From this moment on, I decided, a quiet steel resolve hardening within me. I no longer have a son or a daughter. On Monday morning, the start of a new week, I went to a law firm recommended by a friend. I sat down with a sharp professional attorney and hired her to draft my will. Upon my death, all my assets, everything I owned, would be donated to charity. My children would inherit nothing. I also put Logan and Michelle's house, the one I had essentially purchased, and which was still legally under my name, up for sale immediately. Since they weren't currently living there, I used my spare key to let the real estate agent in to take photos of the property listed and begin showing it. As I stepped out of the real estate agency's office later that day, my phone rang. It was the realtor I had spoken to about the luxury villa I had planned to buy with a portion of my lottery winnings. The villa I had envisioned Logan and Luna helping me choose, maybe even living near me. Miss Isabel. She began cheerfully, completely unaware of the seismic shifts in my life. When would you be available to sign the contract for the villa? If you complete the purchase this month, we're offering 2 years of complimentary property management services. I politely declined her offer. I won't be moving forward with the purchase, I said, my voice flat. The salesperson, surprised, pressed for a reason, but I barely heard their words, their questions fading into the background. My mind had already drifted back several years back to the time when Logan got married to Michelle. At that time, I had sold my old home, the one I had bought decades ago, for a modest $60,000. Thanks to it being located in a good school district, property values had risen significantly, and I managed to sell it for a considerable $250,000. My plan was to use this money as a substantial down payment on a house for Logan and his new wife. But they weren't content with just the down payment. They had their eyes on my bank account too, on my future earnings. They even wanted me to take out the entire mortgage in my name, leveraging my financial stability. To entice me, they offered to add my name to the deed and make me the primary mortgage holder, a superficial gesture that offered me little real security. I refused their blatant attempt to exploit me. Instead, I gave them 2 clear choices. Option 1. I would provide the down payment, but they would be responsible for securing and paying the mortgage themselves. The deed would be solely in their names. Option 2. I would take out the mortgage in my name, making the purchase entirely my responsibility, but the house would remain solely under my ownership. They could live in it, rent-free, and I would rent elsewhere. When I passed away, the property would be split equally between Logan and Luna in my will. They debated the options for days, weighing the benefits before ultimately choosing the second option, the one that offered them free housing at my expense. And Luna? She was never shortchanged either. She attended a private university where the tuition alone cost an astonishing $15,000 per year. After graduating, she took a 2-year gap before beginning graduate school, during which I fully supported her financially. Between living expenses, travel, personal costs, and covering her living expenses, I must have spent at least $100,000 on her during that period alone. Even now, the apartment she rents a comfortable place near her work. I pay the rent every single quarter. They had drained me dry financially and emotionally for years. And back then, I was foolish enough, naive enough to think it was worth it. I believed that after I retired, I'd have a comfortable pension of $5,000 a month, a sum that would continue to increase over time. I had invested in long-term care insurance and a fixed annuity plan that would pay out the principal and interest when I turned 70, ensuring I had a secure future, a cushion for my old age. So I never denied them anything, not once believing I was building a foundation of love and security for them, a legacy. Now looking back from the vantage point of crushing betrayal, what a complete and utter fool I had been. A lifetime spent working, sacrificing, giving everything I had only to be discarded and betrayed by the very people I had dedicated my life to. I terminated my lease on my rental apartment without hesitation. With the lottery winnings, I no longer needed it. Instead, I bought myself a beautiful move-in ready villa, a cozy house with a private garden. Not the large, expensive one I had initially planned for my children's inheritance, but a more modest, comfortable home for myself. I hired a kind, capable housekeeper to take care of the cooking and chores freeing me from the domestic burdens I had carried for decades. For the first time in my life, the very first time, I lived for myself, for my own comfort and peace. But peace, I was quickly reminded, never seemed to last for long in my life. My phone was soon bombarded with calls from Logan, his number appearing repeatedly on the screen. I calmly blocked his number. Moments later, my phone rang again, this time from Michelle, his wife. I hesitated for a moment before answering. There were still a few necessary things left to be said, some final loose ends to tie up. The second the call connected, Logan's furious voice exploded through the speaker, raw, with entitled outrage. "Mom, what the hell are you doing? How could you send a lawyer and a realtor to our house? Are you seriously selling our home? Have you lost your damn mind?" His tone, demanding and accusatory, made my stomach churn. He wasn't asking. He was demanding, as if I were some sort of servant who had dared to disobey. He was acting as if I owed him everything, as if the house was already rightfully his. "Luna always said you were difficult." He sneered, his voice dripping with contempt, echoing his sister's cruel words. "I used to defend you, Mom, but now I see she was absolutely right. Just because we missed your birthday, you're making such a big deal out of nothing. No wonder Dad left you. If I were him, I'd choose Aunt Chloe, too." Even though I had already emotionally severed ties with them, his words still sent a fresh wave of fury through me, a hot, stinging pain. I let out a cold, humorless laugh, the sound brittle in my own ears. "Perfect!" I replied, my voice icy. "Since you've chosen Aunt Chloe as your family, let her buy you a house then. That home is legally mine, as you well know, and I am selling it. So pack up your things and move out within 3 days. Otherwise, my lawyer will be filing charges for illegal occupancy." I paused, letting the implication sink in before adding a final deliberate barb. "Oh, and do pass a message to Luna. Her landlord has been asking about her next rent payment. Just let her know I won't be covering it anymore." Before he could sputter another protest, another insult, I calmly hung up the phone. Then I blocked all their numbers, plunging my phone into silence. I shut the device off entirely, and for the first time in my life, I let that silence be my sole companion, embracing the quietude and the solitude. That weekend, seeking a different kind of warmth and companionship, I went to a local pet rescue center. I spent hours there walking through the kennels, listening to the soft purrs and gentle meows. I left that day having adopted not one, but 2 cats, a fluffy ginger named Leo and a sleek black cat named Cleo. A small private joke, perhaps the name chosen without malice, but with a sense of ironic closure. I filled my new garden with vibrant flowers, trailing vines, and lush shrubs, creating a small oasis of beauty and tranquility. One quiet afternoon, I sat on my balcony, one cat curled contentedly in my lap, the other basking in a patch of sunlight nearby, simply soaking in the warm golden rays. The peace, however, was briefly interrupted by a knock at the front door. My housekeeper came upstairs a few minutes later, her brow furrowed slightly. "Ma'am," she said, her voice respectful, "there are 2 police officers here to see you." Confused, I went downstairs, wondering what on earth could warrant a police visit. As it turned out, Logan and Luna, unable to contact me for months after I blocked them, had reported me missing. Right there in front of me, the officers called Logan to inform him that I was safe and sound at my home. An hour or so later, they arrived at my doorstep. Not just Logan and Luna, but someone I never expected to see again, my older brother Jack. After the police officers left, the 3 of them stood in my garden, taking in the house, the garden, the peaceful atmosphere, with wide, perhaps calculating eyes. Luna was the first to break the awkward silence, her question revealing the true focus of her attention. "Mom, She asked, her tone casual but laced with an undeniable curiosity. "How much do you make as a housekeeper here?" I simply rolled my eyes and ignored her question, the absurdity of it too much to dignify with a response. It had been months since I had last seen them. Logan looked unkempt, his face shadowed with stubble. His clothes wrinkled and disheveled, a stark contrast to the polished young man I had last seen. Luna didn't look much better, tired, tense, her face, etched with visible stress. Life, it seemed, had not been as easy for them as they had anticipated. I sighed, weary of the confrontation. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice firm. "You're not welcome here. Please leave." Logan ran a hand through his hair in frustration, his gesture mirroring his impatience. "Mom, it's been long enough. Don't you think it's time to drop this?" The lawyer actually sued me over the house, and now Michelle is threatening divorce because of it. Just tell him to drop the lawsuit. About a month ago, my attorney had informed me that Logan was flatly refusing to move out of the house, so I had indeed filed a lawsuit against him for illegal occupancy. I met his gaze without hesitation, offering a clear path forward. "If you move out of the house within 3 days," I stated calmly, "I will instruct my lawyer to withdraw the lawsuit." Logan looked genuinely stunned, as if he couldn't comprehend that I was capable of being this resolute, this ruthless. Before he could formulate a response, Luna stepped forward, her hand stretched out expectantly. "Mom." She began skipping past the previous unpleasantness entirely. "About the $100,000 wedding gift you promised me." My promise made years ago, when I foolishly believed in their loyalty, hung in the air. "Can you give it to me now?" She finished, her voice implying I was holding up her life. "Lucifer and I just secured our new home, and we desperately need the money for renovations." I let out a laugh, a short, sharp sound, shaking my head in disbelief. She had money for expensive gold jewelry for another woman, yet she still had her hand out expecting me to fund her life. I reminded her coldly, stating the simple truth. "Your mother is Chloe. If you need help buying a home or planning a wedding, go ask her. After all, she's the one you two chose to honor to spend your time and money on, not me. I won't be giving you a single cent." Luna's face turned scarlet with rage, her carefully composed facade completely shattering. Her voice went sharp, cruel, spitting with fury. "You think we actually want to come crawling to you?" She shrieked, the words dripping with contempt. "We were giving you a chance, Mom. A chance to make amends, to be a mother. But clearly, you'd rather be stubborn and bitter. Fine, but don't come crawling back when you're old and alone needing help. Don't ever expect us to take care of you." She scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You know what Chloe is, a better mother than you ever were. She's prettier, kinder, more loving. When I get married, Dad and Chloe will be sitting in the parents' seats. As for you, come or don't come, I honestly don't care." Then, without waiting for my response, without a backward glance, she stormed out of the garden, disappearing through the gate. Her words should have hurt, should have wounded me deeply, but they didn't, not anymore. The well of tears of pain had run dry. I watched her leave with a profound sense of indifference, calmly brushing off some imaginary dust from my sleeve. As I turned to head back inside my house, I noticed 2 figures still standing in my yard. Logan still frozen in place, his face etched with a mixture of shock and troubled thought, and Jack, my brother, who had been watching the entire spectacle unfold, with a look of undisguised amusement, clearly enjoying the drama. I had almost forgotten he was there. I had long known that Jack's life hadn't been particularly smooth these past years. My parents had spoiled him rotten, favoring him above all else. Originally, my father, pulling strings using his government connections, had secured him a well-paying government job. But Jack was lazy, utterly incompetent, and frequently skipped work without valid reason. It wasn't long before he was predictably fired. After that, my parents generously funded several small businesses for him, hoping one would finally stick. Some ventures made a little money, others failed miserably, but he always managed to get by propped up by their financial support. Then, for a brief period, he hit something of a jackpot, opening a wholesale food business that actually took off, bringing in significant income. But just as he started making real money, accumulating a substantial sum, he found himself a mistress, a woman who it turned out was a professional con artist. She systematically scammed him for everything he had. His wife, having had enough of his infidelity and financial recklessness, divorced him, walking away with half of what little he had left after the mistress finished with him. And now here he was, standing in my garden looking somewhat less prosperous than he used to. When he saw me looking at him, his expression shifted immediately. He flashed a wide, grinning, greasy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Isabel!" He began, his voice attempting a tone of warmth and familial concern. "Mom and Dad miss you. They really want you to come home and visit." I narrowed my eyes, instantly suspicious. Something was off. Jack had never cared about family bonds beyond what he could extract from them. So why was he suddenly playing messenger, trying to broker a reconciliation? He took a step forward, his voice laced with that fake, cloying warmth. "Dad doesn't hold a grudge against you anymore. You know, he's just stubborn, that's all. Divorce isn't even a big deal these days." He added, glancing back at Logan's troubled face. "Look around, Isabel. Everyone's doing it." I nearly laughed out loud at the sheer hypocrisy. Now that he himself was divorced, having experienced the messy reality of it, he had conveniently forgotten how he had once ridiculed me for daring to leave Jeff, for daring to break the mold. I cut straight to the chase, unwilling to play his games. "What do you really want, Jack?" I asked, my voice blunt and direct. "If there's nothing else, please get out of my garden." Jack hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by my refusal to indulge his pretense, then sighed, rubbing his hands together in that familiar, sleazy way that always signaled he was about to ask for something. All right, I won't beat around the bush," he conceded, dropping the act. "It's about Mom and Dad. Dad took a bad fall while he was out for a walk a little while back. The doctors say it's pretty serious. He might end up bedridden permanently." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation hang in the air. "Mom thinks you should come back and take care of him. You always complained that they favored me, right? Well, now's your chance to spend some quality time with them, to show them you care." I almost laughed again, this time from sheer disbelief from the audacity of his request. If I remember correctly, I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil his words stirred. "Their combined retirement pensions are nearly $10,000 a month. Are you seriously telling me they can't afford to hire a caregiver?" Jack's face twisted in frustration, his greed suddenly exposed. "If we hire a nurse, Isabel, then how am I supposed to survive? I'm 68 years old. You expect me to go out and get a job at my age?" There it was, the real reason. Even with my father immobilized, even with my aging mother increasingly frail, the money, their substantial pension, still had to go to their precious, golden son, Jack. Where was this concern, this familial expectation when Jeff was tearing my life apart, when I was left with nothing, struggling alone to survive and raise 2 children? Where were they then? Now suddenly they remembered they had a daughter who might be useful. I simply shrugged, an expression of indifference settling on my face. "Their situation has nothing to do with me, Jack. I won't be coming back. Now please leave." Jack's face darkened, the amusement replaced by simmering anger. "Isabel," he warned, his voice taking on a threatening edge. "I already consulted a lawyer. Even if you've been estranged from them for years, you are still legally obligated to support your parents if they are unable to support themselves." I smiled a genuine, albeit cold smile. "Then sue me, Jack. If a judge orders me to pay, I will, of course, comply. But until then, not a single penny of my money will go towards them." I turned and walked towards the house, pausing only to call security and ask them to escort my brother off the property. As I expected, Jack never took legal action. He had always been too lazy, too unwilling to go through that kind of sustained effort. Instead, he did the bare minimum. He dumped our parents into a rundown, understaffed nursing home. His only instruction to the staff: just make sure they don't die. Because of course he still needed their pension checks to survive. 2 months later, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was faint, slurred, barely recognizable. "Belle!" It rasped. I froze. It had been decades, perhaps 30 years or more, since I had last heard that nickname, the one my father used when I was a child. I held the phone without speaking, my heart a cold, still stone in my chest. "Your father. I don't have much time left, Belle." The voice continued, each word a painful gasp. "But there's something I need to get off my chest before I go. I wanted to tell you. I'm sorry." His breathing was labored, his words coming in ragged gasps, punctuated by coughs. He said a lot more after that, more than I had ever heard him say in my entire life. A rambling confession, an attempt at deathbed reconciliation. I didn't listen to a single word of it. My father had always been a domineering, patriarchal man. To him, a woman's only purpose was to depend on a man. A father, a husband, a brother. He had forbidden me from divorcing Jeff, not because he cared about my happiness, but because he didn't want my failed marriage to be the one stain on his otherwise perfectly respectable, carefully curated life. And when I defied him, when I divorced anyway, he was the first to crush me under his heel, casting me out of the family fold. Now, on his deathbed, he wanted to apologize. His words felt like a wet, frozen coat draped over my shoulders, offered not to comfort me, not to warm me after the cold I had already endured alone, but to remind me of it, to burden me with his belated guilt. I didn't need it. Before I hung up, my mother's soft, frail voice came on the line, murmuring the address of their nursing home. I hesitated for a long time, the address a heavy weight in my mind. But in the end, a flicker of something, perhaps obligation, perhaps a morbid curiosity, perhaps just the habit of responding to their calls for help, drew me there. I went. When I entered his room, I found him lying there, gaunt and hollow, his cheeks sunken like a dried-up corpse, barely recognizable. I hadn't seen him in over 10 years. The last time had been on his 70th birthday. I had brought gifts, an attempt at reconciliation, but like always, he had thrown them out the door, refusing to acknowledge my presence. I never went back after that. Now, as I stood by his bed, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and decay, his lips quivered slightly, his breathing growing shallower, more ragged. Neither of us spoke. We simply existed in the quiet room, bound by a lifetime of unspoken resentments and missed opportunities. 10 minutes later, he closed his eyes. 2 murky tears like muddy rivers slid slowly down his withered face. I turned and walked out of the room. As I stepped into the hall, my mother shuffled after me, her frail hands trembling, her body bent with age now, 85 years old. I turned to look at her. I felt nothing. She had spent her entire life in submission, in quiet obedience to my father. No matter what he did, no matter how he treated me, how he cast me out like garbage, she never objected, never stood up for me. Was she weak, or did she simply not love me enough to defy him? I wondered if my father had ever threatened to cut ties with Jack. Her golden son, would she have obeyed just as blindly, just as silently? I reached into my bag, pulled out a check for $10,000 and pressed it into her trembling hand. "For his funeral?" I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I won't be attending." Then I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the sterile corridor. Behind me, her soft, broken sobs trailed into the empty hallway, a mournful echo of a life spent in quiet sorrow. Life, however, moved on. I opened a large cafe bookstore over 3,000 square feet of space, a place I envisioned as a sanctuary for reading connection and community. I was only 66. I couldn't just sit around eating and drinking, waiting for time to run out, waiting to die. During the renovations, I specifically had power outlets installed at every single seat, making it easy for patrons to work or study. Shelves overflowed with books old and new, and the air was always thick with the rich, comforting scent of coffee and roasted beans. I hired a diverse staff, students working part-time to fund their education, and people with disabilities who needed stable employment and a supportive environment. People came not just for the coffee, but to work remotely, to study, to read for hours in a cozy corner. It wasn't a highly profitable business, not designed for maximizing profit, but it didn't lose money either. It sustained itself, providing jobs and a welcoming space. One day, while managing the counter during a busy afternoon shift, I saw Michelle walk in hand with a man I didn't recognize. They looked intimate, their body language radiating closeness. The moment she saw me standing behind the counter, her expression froze, a flicker of recognition and discomfort crossing her face. She immediately let go of the man's hand. Then, after a brief hesitation, she let out a self-deprecating laugh, walking towards me. "Logan and I are in the middle of a divorce." She admitted volunteering the information before I could even ask. "He's been involved with a woman Chloe introduced him to for a long time. I only started seeing my boyfriend after that became clear." I simply nodded, offering no judgment, no platitudes. Logan and Luna's lives, their relationship dramas, no longer concerned me. Whatever happened to them, whatever choices they made, I wouldn't interfere, wouldn't offer help or criticism. Michelle sighed a sound of weary resignation, then turned to her boyfriend. "Let's go somewhere else," she murmured. As they walked away, leaving my cafe behind, I let out a quiet sigh. I could only hope that Logan, facing the fallout of his own choices, wouldn't regret them too deeply. When Luna got married, she didn't invite me. I hadn't expected an invitation, but the omission was a final, deliberate statement. A friend, perhaps unaware of the depth of the estrangement, sent me a video clip from the wedding, along with a simple message. "Why is Chloe sitting in the mother's seat at Luna's wedding?" I replied, simply stating the quiet truth of the situation. "I suppose I don't deserve to be there." "Ugh." My friend hesitated for a long time, their typing indicator flickering on and off as they struggled to find the right words. In the end, they just sent a sad emoji, a silent acknowledgement of the pain. I won't lie, watching that video, seeing Chloe, the woman who had haunted my marriage, sitting proudly in the place where I should have been, stung. But more than sadness, more than the familiar ache of betrayal, I felt a profound sense of relief. At that moment, watching the woman who was now officially my children's chosen mother, something inside me finally let go. The decades of hurt, of clinging to what was lost, of hoping for reconciliation, it all faded. Unexpectedly, my cafe bookstore became more than just a quiet place for reading and coffee. It became a local sensation. People flocked to it, drawn by the cozy atmosphere, the smell of books and coffee, the quietude it offered in a busy world. Initially, I had been concerned that business wasn't thriving enough to sustain itself, but my young employees, full of energy and creative ideas, brainstormed ways to attract more customers. They came up with the brilliant idea of monthly themed drinks, tying into the literary ambiance. January, the Golden Fortune Latte, a nod to my secret lottery win perhaps, though they didn't know the story. February, a Sweetheart Mocha. March, a unique coffee and tea fusion. Paired with the comforting intellectual atmosphere, the themes worked wonders, generating buzz. Local travel bloggers and social media influencers began recommending the cafe, posting photos of the aesthetic interior and the unique drinks. Soon the cafe was bustling every single day, filled with customers. I noticed my employees were exhausted from the increased workload, so I did what I could. I raised their salaries significantly and hired more staff, ensuring they were fairly compensated and not overburdened. Luna found out who owned the thriving cafe after seeing a news interview about me featuring the successful local business owner and her unique establishment. By the time she came looking for me, she was heavily pregnant, her belly round, and prominent. She walked up to the counter, her face tired but familiar, and ordered an iced Americano, her usual order. The barista, following my silent instruction, poured her a glass of warm water instead. She didn't protest, accepting the small gesture of care without comment. We sat across from each other at a quiet table. She smiled faintly, a fragile attempt at connection, but then tears welled up in her eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. "Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I think I made a mistake." I took a slow sip of my coffee, the familiar bitterness spreading across my tongue, a taste I had grown accustomed to over the years. Luna looked away, her eyes swollen, her complexion pale, and a large, angry bruise was clearly visible on her forehead. Her lips trembled, and then she broke down, sobbing, the carefully maintained composure cracking entirely. "Mom," she choked out between sobs. "Lucifer cheated on me." I stiffened, slightly surprised. Lucifer had always seemed like a mild-mannered, seemingly good-natured guy. I had assumed he was reliable, decent. But Luna's next words shattered that assumption, revealing the depths of the betrayal. "I'm 4 months pregnant," she sobbed. "But the woman he's seeing is already about to give birth. He's been telling me he's busy with work. But really, he's been living with her this entire time. Last weekend, I drove 3 hours to see him. When I got there, I caught them together in his apartment. I pushed the woman, and he hit me. So Jeff hadn't been able to get Lucifer that government job at City Hall after all." I asked, my voice calm, detached. "Did you tell your father and Chloe about what happened?" Luna's eyes widened in shock, surprised by my knowledge of her life, her connections. I continued, stating the obvious. "Your father has connections, Luna. You should ask him to stand up for you to help you deal with this man." She stared at me, stunned into silence by my response, which was so different from the maternal comfort she perhaps expected. Tears spilled down her cheeks anew. "Mom," she whispered, her voice laced with desperation. "Are you really abandoning me?" I stood up from the table, pushing my chair back quietly. My voice was calm, steady, resolute. "You were the ones who abandoned me first, Luna." I stated plainly, without anger, just simple fact. "I chose to let you go. This," I gestured around the cafe, "isn't a recycling center. You don't get to come and go as you please, only when you need something." Before turning to leave, I gave her one last piece of advice, born from my own painful experience, from decades of learning to rely on myself. "If no one else is willing to save you, Luna," I said, my voice soft but firm, "then you have to save yourself. Leave that man as soon as possible. I told you before, a woman can live a good, fulfilling life entirely on her own, relying on her own strength. You will be fine." Time passed in the blink of an eye, marked by the turning pages of books and the gentle rhythm of the cafe. The number of cats in my care grew. Most of them were found abandoned at the doorstep of my cafe, left there by people who knew I wouldn't turn them away. They became part of the cafe family, weaving through the legs of customers offering silent companionship. The young people working for me were a good bunch, hardworking and respectful. At the very least, as their boss, they treated me with warmth and respect, something I hadn't always received from my own family. I didn't expect profound sincerity from them, not the deep, unconditional connection I had once longed for from my children. I had learned long ago that true sincerity is rare, something that can't be forced or bought, and that was fine. I had learned that living happily in the present, finding joy in small things, in the warmth of the sun, the purring of a cat, the smell of coffee, was enough. Life, however, continued its unpredictable course, and its toll was finally taken on Jeff Smith. One evening, while leaving his home to pick up Chloe from the shopping mall, he suffered a severe stroke. The damage was extensive, debilitating paralysis. On one side of his body, slurred speech, making communication difficult, and severely limited mobility. Chloe, the woman who had once seemed so devoted to him, so willing to build a life around him, stuck around for a while. She supervised his initial treatment, handled the complex finances, but medical care for a stroke is incredibly expensive. Despite his government pension and any savings they had accumulated, the costs piled up quickly, draining their accounts dry. Jeff became a burden, a constant demanding presence, and Chloe, who had once stolen him from another woman through manipulation and deceit, wasn't the type to sacrifice her own comfort and freedom for a sick, disabled husband. Before long, she had enough. She packed her bags, emptied what little remained of their joint account, and left him with one final cold sentence. "I didn't sign up for this, Jeff." Logan, his life already complicated by his divorce from Michelle, and increasing debt, was forced to take his disabled father in. But Logan had his own significant problems. After his divorce, he had quickly jumped into a new relationship, hoping for a fresh start, for someone to help shoulder his burdens. But his new girlfriend had no interest in a broke, struggling man who was now saddled with caring for a severely disabled parent. When it became clear that Logan was drowning in debts, his life spiraling downwards, she cut her losses and promptly left him. Now stuck with a disabled father who required constant care, Logan's life unraveled further. His once comfortable, aspirational lifestyle had shrunk dramatically into bare survival. He could barely afford the rent on a tiny, cramped apartment. Caring for Jeff was an exhausting, demanding, round-the-clock task. Feeding him, bathing him, administering medications, dealing with his endless medical needs and emotional frustrations. Logan resented every second of it, the burden crushing him. Predictably, before long, he turned to Luna for help, hoping she could share the load. But Luna had already changed, fundamentally altered by her own experiences. She had divorced Lucifer the moment her son was born, making the difficult decision to leave a toxic, deceitful relationship rather than raising her child in a broken marriage, repeating the pattern she had witnessed growing up. She left the city where she had lived, moving somewhere entirely new, a place where no one knew her past, allowing her a fresh start. Life was hard there, balancing work, motherhood, and all the relentless struggles of being a single parent with limited resources. It was during this period, this demanding, solitary journey, that she finally began to understand, truly understand, the immense sacrifices her mother had once made for her and Logan. She remembered vividly the long nights when her mother stayed up rocking them to sleep, the cold winters, when she hand-washed their clothes. Because they couldn't afford a washing machine, the soft lullabies sung in the dark. The sleepless nights spent worrying and working, the relentless struggle just to give them a better future, a secure foundation. She had never appreciated it before, not truly, not until she walked a mile in those same worn-out shoes. Now she did. At first, she hesitated, unsure if reaching out was even possible after everything that had happened. Then one night on impulse, perhaps driven by a sudden surge of understanding and regret, she sent her mother a text message. "Mom, how have you been?" No response came back. Weeks later, she tried again, a simple, heartfelt apology. "I'm sorry for everything." Still silence from my end. She didn't expect forgiveness, not necessarily, but something inside her still hoped for some acknowledgement, some small sign that the door wasn't entirely shut. So every few months, despite the lack of response, she sent another message, a quiet confession of her newfound understanding. "I understand now, Mom, everything you did for us. You must have been so tired, working so hard, carrying everything alone. I don't expect you to answer. I just wanted you to know that I think about you, that I finally understand." No reply ever came from me, but still she sent them anyway, the messages floating out into the digital void, a testament to her changing perspective, her dawning realization. As for me, I read every single message. Each one arrived silently on my phone, a notification I acknowledged and processed, but I never replied. Some wounds, once cut too deep, once they have festered for years, can never be fully mended, leaving scars that are simply too profound, too sensitive to touch. But that didn't mean I wished her misery, didn't mean I wanted her to suffer. If anything, I hoped that one day, my daughter Luna would truly stand on her own 2 feet, that she would find her inner strength, her resilience, that she would learn to live for herself, not for a man, not for external validation, not for perceived advantage, but simply because she deserved a good life, a life built on her own terms. Time continued its gentle forward march. My cafe bookstore thrived, a warm, bustling hub in the community. My home was filled with warmth, with the comforting presence of books and the soft rhythmic purring of my adopted cats. The people who had once weighed me down, who had caused me so much pain and consumed so much of my emotional energy. My father, my ex-husband, my children. They no longer controlled my life. They were characters in a past chapter, a story I had survived. There had been immense pain, devastating betrayal, and heartbreaking loss along the way, but I had endured. And now, finally, wonderfully, I lived for myself. I had spent a lifetime giving sacrificing, enduring hardship for others. Now I chose joy. There were no more regrets, no more unbearable burdens, just the simple pleasure of a good cup of coffee in my own peaceful home, a quiet afternoon spent reading with a cat in my lap, and the profound, liberating knowledge that after everything, after the long, arduous journey, I had finally learned how to be truly free.